Okay, good morning. On behalf of the representation of the European Commission in Austria, I would like to welcome you to our seminar today, and a very special good morning to Sweden, to our speakers, Anne-Cathrine Jungar and Patrik Oksanen. As usual, I would also like to thank Mijana Tomic from the Forum for Journalism and Media for having brought us together here today. As a kind of small warm-up, allow me to give 3 facts on Sweden from the EU perspective. First, on the 1st of January 2023, Sweden will take over the rotating presidency in the EU Council for 6 months. Second, Sweden is the 3rd largest EU member state in terms of surface. And third fact, as we speak a lot of renewable energy these days, I would like to point out that with a share of 60% in final energy consumption, Sweden is the EU's frontrunner when it comes to renewable energy. However, today the topic is not energy, but another very challenging issue, external and internal security. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to Mijana, who will present the topic and the speakers in detail. So again, many thanks to all of you for being with us today, and I wish you an interesting seminar.
Thank you so much, Sabine. Good morning, everybody. And my name is Mijana Tomic. I'm a former journalist, and now I organize and moderate seminars on current affairs and media, focusing on Europe. Since 2017, FUME, the organization I work for, and the representation of the European Commission in Austria have been organizing background talks on the elections in certain European countries, not necessarily EU, but European. And we always focused on understanding the local context and local perceptions that are often not exactly the same as the facts. Today is no exception. Elections in Sweden are important on several levels, for Swedes primarily, but also for the rest of Europe. And there are 2 levels that we would like to address today. One is the radical change in foreign policy, security policy by Sweden applied to join the NATO, which has a wide implication for the rest of Europe and the current situation, and its internal challenges with migration, gang wars, and the announced winter hardships are also important to understand. We have 2 great speakers. Patrik Oksanen is a journalist and security specialist, and Anne-Cathrine Jungar is university professor and expert on the far right in Northern Europe. I'm not saying that she will only talk about the far right, but that's her specialty. We shall start with Patrik to have first a bigger picture, although maybe it is not a primary concern for the voters, and then we shall ask Anne-Cathrine to give the specific issues, to explain the issues that matter to the voters when they go to the polls on the 11th. Let us know about, Patrik, could you let us know a little bit more about the debate, which is rather important for Austria, which is a neutral country, that preceded the radical change in foreign policy, discussions about policies towards the war in Ukraine and policies towards Russia, and does foreign policy play any role in the elections? For example, I understand that the Social Democrats claimed, it was yesterday or the day before, that Sweden Democrats pose a security and foreign policy threat, that the defense minister, Peter Hultqvist, said that, which he called that the opposition party's connections to Putin's Russia pose a security risk for Sweden. Is it so? And please give us a broad picture of where is Sweden today when it comes to foreign policy. Patrik, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, and I guess we will go more into depth perhaps with the Sweden Democrats after Anne-Cathrine Jungar has given her presentation, because the far right is her specialty. But I have also looked a lot into Sweden Democrats and their Russian connection. But let us save that part to a bit later. But I'll start with the overall picture, and if we start from where we are today, I would say that foreign policy is not a big issue in the election debate. That was handled during the spring, so the matters were settled, and that was the change that Sweden changed and applied to NATO, and that was the huge leap that was done. To understand that debate and how quickly it went, we must go back in history, and we go back to the Second World War, where Finland was attacked by USSR in 1939, and then in 1944, after the continuation war, was forced into a relationship with USSR. And with regards to Finland, Sweden decided to stay outside of NATO in 1949, when the idea of creating a Scandinavian defense union together with Denmark and Norway collapsed. The fear back then was that if Sweden would join NATO, Stalin would push Finland into its orbit more forcefully. And that, just to remind you, you have had the coup in Czechoslovakia in 1948, the year before. And then during the Cold War, the Sweden's neutrality became a mantra, a fact in the political life, even though that secretly we belonged to the Western Bloc and had secretly military cooperation on high level. For example, the Swedish head of Navy had his war placement. If Sweden would come into a war, then he would be placed in London, for example. This bringing us back to today, and what we saw during the autumn 21 was Russia increasing its demands on spheres of influence. And this was, for example, expressed the 17th of December, when Putin stated that Sweden and Finland belonged to the Russian sphere of influence, stating that Sweden and Finland should not be allowed to exercise with other countries, etc., etc., etc. This message was really taken into concern, especially in Helsinki. To understand how Sweden ended up in NATO, one must understand that the reaction was more quick and more thorough in reaction to Russia in Helsinki. So it was Finland taking the lead in the discussion. And when Sweden started to realize that Finland was serious about joining NATO, and that is really historical, the Swedish debate changed quickly. Up to that moment, there was a minority in parliament wanted to join NATO, but the Sweden Democrats, this far-right party with historical troublesome relationship with Russia, changed their position and said that they wanted to join NATO when Finland did it. And then the Social Democratic Party, the government party, also changed. And this process was pretty quick. It took basically a couple of months from the 24th of February to change this position. And after that happened, I would argue that the debate about Sweden joining NATO in Sweden it's handled. It's no political nerve in it. Of course, you have the left party opposing it, NATO membership. You have also the Green Party opposing membership in NATO, but with less energy than the left party. But these two parties are together collecting perhaps 12% of the electorate. So you have a really huge parliamentary support for Sweden joining NATO. And concerning the mentality of Sweden, you will see Sweden join NATO with a wholehearted effort, and the Swedish trait is trying to be best in class, following all the rules and regulations. We see that in EU, for example. So that is what you can expect Sweden to do. This is also combined with a historical decision to increase arms spending. So now there is a commitment from all political parties to reach 2% of GDP as soon as possible, as it is said. Then they argue how possible it is to reach it in 2025, or will it be delayed until 2028? That's the debate right now, but there is a full parliamentarian support for 2% of GDP. That is compared with today's spending, which is around 1.3% of GDP. So you will see also a huge increase of the defense budget. And this is also not controversial in the Swedish debate during this election. So that means that we are arguing a lot about domestic issues in the debate. So that is my short introduction, my short overflight, my broad draws of the pencil to paint the picture.
Thank you very much, Anne-Cathrine. I would like you now to give your broad picture about the issues that really matter to the voters. But I would just like to make a very short, let's say, thought. In 2018, the European Commission, the representation of the European Commission, also, and Hume, we also had an event on the elections in Sweden with the historian Lars Trägård and journalist Sofia Nerbrand. And we were also talking about migration, among other things, and they were rather optimistic at the time. They did not deny the problems, but they were, let's say, optimistic that the problems would be solved. In 4 years, it seems that the situation has worsened. 4 years ago, we were not speaking about gang wars. We were not speaking about segregation. Just the wording was totally different. And one more thought before I give the screen to Anne-Cathrine is, when I started preparing this event, I was reading on Swedish radio the main topics. I heard the debates, and it all focused on migration, segregation, integration, criminality. But then 2 weeks later, now that the prices of energy are increasing so much, now the economic aspect seems to be as important. And I'm also wondering, where will all the money come from? I understand there is a big package to save energy companies in Sweden. Where will all this money come from for saving the energy sector, for the military, and to make sure that citizens don't really suffer this winter? Please, Anne-Cathrine.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everyone, and thank you for being able to give this presentation before the Swedish elections. Could you start the PowerPoint presentation? I need some help here because this was a new system for me. As to your question, Mirja, you are right in that respect that until 10 years ago, before the Sweden Democrats made their parliamentary breakthrough in 2010. And then immigration and segregation belong not to the main top priorities or concerns among the Swedish voters. That was the case since 2014. Then immigration and segregation have indeed been important issues, both for the voters and for the parties in how they present themselves, and for the voters for which parties they vote for. And that explains why the Sweden Democrats during the last elections every time has increased their share of the vote. So there has been a change. I mean, Sweden has been a country where kind of socioeconomic issues and socioeconomic left-right policies have been on the top, like employment, the welfare state, the educational system. But during the last 10 years, this has changed. So this is indeed, and it has been a concern among an increasing number of voters. And since the last election, when you had your last session on the Swedish political system, the mainstream parties have to a large degree adapted to the Sweden Democratic's framing of which are the main societal problems in the Swedish society. that is kind of immigration, segregation, and criminality, and law and order. And so these topics have, in that sense, become more important, both not only for Sweden Democratic voters, but for a large share of the voters, even the Social Democratic voters, as well as the conservative and liberal voters. So this is indeed a change in the Swedish parliamentary system. Well, I'm just a short overview. I'm a political scientist, so I mean, I want to kind of explain what the system is about. I mean, Sweden it has a parliamentary system. It has a proportional electoral system. You could change the slide, please, going to the next slide, if possible. Here you can see the 9 party leaders for the 8 Swedish parties that are represented in the Swedish parliament, called the Riksdag. And why 9 party leaders? Well, that is because the Green Party has 2 spokespersons, so they have, in a sense, 2 party leaders. Well, the Swedish parliamentary political system has traditionally been a 5-party system consisting of 2 parties to the left, the Social Democratic Party being the main party, and for a long period it was kind of the sole party of the Swedish governments, forming minority governments with the left-wing party, or not forming minority governments, but being in government with the support, parliamentary support, of either the left-wing party or center and other parties. And to the right, we have the Conservative Party, the Liberal Party, Christian Democratic Party, and now the Sweden Democratic Party became a member of the parliament after in 2010. It was formed in 1988. And on the left, of course, you also have the left-wing party. So it has become a much more complicated party system. Government formation has become much more complicated. After the last elections in 2018, it took 134 days to form a government, and that was the longest time in modern political history to form a government. The government that was formed was a government by the Social Democratic Party and the Environmental Party, but as they did not control a parliamentary majority by their own, they had an alliance, kind of support parties with the Center Party and the Liberal Party. That didn't last that long, for 2 years. And so we have had kind of troubled situation in the parliament, and that is kind of the background for these elections, because the voters do not only vote for a party, they also made a choice of which government they would like to have. And previously, the Swedish political system has been like a functional majority system, because you have known that there have been bloc politics. So you have known either you have a center-right government or a center-left government. Now these blocs have dissolved, and there is a much more fluid situation. And what is kind of the elephant in the room is naturally the Sweden Democrats, because until the last elections, there was a cordon sanitaire around the Sweden Democrats. The parties were reluctant to talk with them, to negotiate with them, to make compromises or cooperate with them, and to use them as support parties for government formation. This changed rapidly after the last elections, when firstly the Christian Democratic Party leader invited the Swedish Democratic Party leader Jimmie Åkesson for lunch, and afterwards the party leader of the Conservative Party invited him for lunch. So the isolation is broken. And after that, also many of the parties have adapted. I mean, they have moved policy-wise closer to the Sweden Democrats on issues like immigration, law and order, and segregation. That means more restrictive immigration policies, harder punishments for law and order, more competencies given to the police, and also in order to investigate criminality. And also, when it comes to segregation, there are discussions on more requirements. You have to know language tests and knowledge tests in order to become a Swedish citizen, even to become, even to have a permanent residence permit as an immigrant to Sweden. So we can see that a lot of parties have adapted to the Sweden Democrats. So this will maybe be the first time, or it is the first time, when we have kind of two blocks again, one right wing and one left wing, but there are new parties within them. And the Sweden Democrats are prepared to be a support party to a conservative government, but above all, some of the parties are prepared to take over government with the support of the Sweden Democrats, but they are quite still reluctant to include them fully into the government and give them ministerial portfolios. So that is kind of the background of the situation. Could I have the following slide, please? So here you can see the results from the last elections. And as you see, the Social Democratic Party was the largest party, followed by the Conservative Party, Moderaterna. But you see, the Sweden Democrats are the third largest, we're the third largest party. And that is the case in many of the Scandinavian and Nordic countries. In Denmark, that was the case before, not anymore, since the Danish People's Party have been imploding. And then you see a number of smaller parties in the Swedish political system polling less than 10%, the Center Party and the left-wing party, the Christian Democrats, the Liberals, and the Environmental Party. And as I said, the government up to now, during the parliamentary period, has been a minority government consisting of the Social Democratic Party and the Green Party. And they have then been negotiating majorities within the parliament. And obviously there has been discussions that the governments are too weak. They are too weak to implement large-scale reforms. And there are concerns that we need Sweden would need kind of broader and more long-term parliamentary cooperation to undertake some of the reforms that Maria was talking about previously. So could I have the following slide, please? So we talked about which are the most important questions for the voters, and as these have changed. And here I have then listed some, because there are opinion polls made repeatedly, asking the voters which issues are the most important for them. And still in July, healthcare was on the top, at least by the opinion institute Novus. It was the most important question for a lot of voters. Law and order came second, education third, and immigration fourth. Well, then you can ask, why healthcare and why education? I won't go into length about this, but there has been an ongoing debate for at least the last 5 years about healthcare and particularly education, and education is related to issues of segregation. Sweden introduced in the 1990s a system of private, being able to have private healthcare and private education. They are not private in the sense that you pay yourself, but you can go with your public health care and you pay the same amount of money going to use healthcare, and the education is free. But you have enterprises that can run schools, but they are then paid, or they get the money from the municipalities. They get a specific sum for each and every pupil. And since in the educational system, it is these good schools are then some of the private schools, not all, and then middle class parents, they make kind of the choices, and you have to choose these schools already when the kids are quite young, almost already when they are born, to get a place in these schools. So it's a question, and of course it's a question also because it has been very profitable to run these private schools, and there is a discussion: should it be possible to make a lot of money and a lot of gains with kind of publicly sponsored and paid with public funding. So that has been an issue, but it hasn't really been politicized. And actually, it's a question where the public is more negative to the present situation, but there is no majority in the parliament for changing the system apart from marginal changes. So, but law and order are then among the top priorities. And if you look at the opinion polls made in August by Demoscop and SOM, you see and law and order has climbed up to being the top priority, and against the background that once again in the summer there is an increasing number of gang violence, and the gang violence is obviously related to drugs and criminal behavior. And of course, healthcare is still among the top concerns, and education as well, and immigration and integration. In the Demoscope, you can see that the climate was had been climbing among the concerns among the voters. We have had a very hot summer, and the people start talking about climate change and how the climate is different from what it was before. And economy has been increasing too in importance given the energy situation and the talks about energy prices. In particular in southern Sweden, the people have really felt that on their skin, because electricity bills have been tenfolding in some areas. And that's part of the political debate as well. But I think the parties and the government has been saying, well, this is not due to the policies we have made. What the energy crisis is related to kind of what is happening, the war in Ukraine, and so. And obviously there are differences between men and women, between their concerns. Women are more concerned about healthcare and education, whereas men are more concerned about law and order and immigration. And that is also reflected in how they vote, which parties they vote for. Then could I have the following slide? Well, in the opinion polls, we have seen that the Social Democratic parties, they experience kind of a Magdalena effect. The Social Democratic Party had their first female party leader, and Sweden received, even though being kind of the model country of gender equality, their first female prime minister, Magdalena Andersson, but that effect seemed to be decreasing now before the elections. The Conservative Party had also were the second largest parties, but now the Sweden Democratic Party are sometimes above the Conservative Party in the election polls, sometimes below. They are quite floating, and that would be kind of a shock for the system if the Sweden Democratic Party would be the largest conservative party in the parliament. That would obviously impact on the government formation. So those are the three largest parties, and there have been concern that there is a 4% threshold for in the parliamentary elections. Unless a party gets 4% of the vote, they will have no representation in the parliament. But it seems now that all the small parties will make it over the 4% threshold. So, I mean, I think a good guess would be that we still will have 8 parties in the parliament after next Sunday. And then the last slide with the government there is a slide with the government. Well, there is no.
This was the last one.
Okay, so it must have it must have not have been there. So about the government formation, if the Social Democratic Party and the left-wing parties, and the left-wing parties are belonging to kind of the center-left bloc, are the Social Democratic Party, the Green Party, the left-wing party, and the Center Party has said that they will support a social democratic government this time. If they receives a plurality of the votes, they will receive the task to form the government by the Speaker of the Parliament. But if the bloc consisting of the Conservative Party, the Liberals, the Christian Democrats and the Sweden Democrats will be the largest party, then they will receive the mission to form the government. And that is left to see. And it's a very close race between the two blocs. And I think irrespective of which bloc will win, there will be difficult negotiations negotiation. The Speaker of the Parliament say, well, this time it will not take, the governmental negotiations will not take 134 days as last year. It remains to be seen, depending on the requirements of the parties, what they would like to have in return for either being a part of government or being a support party of government. Because I think one thing we can be sure of, Sweden will once again, as it always have a minority government with one of the largest parties in the government, with some of the smaller parties, and then there will be a number of support parties supporting the government from the parliament. So that was kind of the background. I think I maybe talked too long, but
thank you very, very much. Well, I asked the audience to prepare the questions. We shall ask them live. In between, I have a few questions for both of you. You have spoken wonderfully about the framework, let's put it this way. But I did listen to the debates in English of the representatives of different parties in Sweden. And when one talks about gang wars, it is like Chicago. And I would like to ask, what has failed? Why has there been this increase in gang wars? This is question one, but I'll ask both of you. Second, how come that younger and younger people join the gangs? Third, I understand that Anders Ygeman, Minister for Integration and Migration, has spoken of the link between ethnicity and integration, and I assume crime. And what are the policies that different parties suggest as a solution? When I spoke to Patrik preparing this event, he said it would take decades to solve the problem. So let's start with you, Patrik, and then can you give us an idea what has failed? Even if it is based on perceptions, because perceptions are very important for the voters. Not everyone deals with nuances and details.
Well, when something fails, hugely, one can say that there are many small parts contributing. Let me point out some of them. Failed integration. That you have areas in Sweden where you have a large portion of the population coming from outside of Sweden, living not integrated, and also without jobs and with not good future prospects of the lives, and also the sense of not belonging. And here especially the second generation, where you have a lot of these feelings. That is one part. The second part is the inflow of drugs and the failure of stopping drugs and the growing of the use of drugs, which drives an economy around this. There is a market for drugs, and this also creates different gangs competing for control of the market. A third part of it, I would argue, is the inflow of guns, especially from former Yugoslavia, which have weaponized these gangs. And these things together have created a toxic situation. And also in this, you talked about recruiting young. Here you have also the combination of for example, gangster rap, the creation of a glamorous lifestyle around criminality. Also with the combination of older guys knowing that if they use younger guys, they will not be punished in the system, because you have different thresholds, for example 15 or 18 in the penal system. So to avoid sanctions from the society, you recruit younger people who also looks up to the guys who are older, that could have gold necklaces, nice cars, and so on. So this is the overall situation, and this has grown now so much. So when you talk with police who are working with this, they could openly state that this will take decades to solve. There is no quick fix, and that with that said, that means that there is no quick fix for either governmental path. Either you get a right-wing government or a more left-wing government. These problems will persist over time. Anne-Cathrine, would you like to
Yeah, sure.
complement what I did not say?
Yeah, I'm fully agree with what Patrik says here. And I mean, Sweden, as in some states, we have a very active hip hop or not hip hop. What is it? Gangster rap scene, and that's also connected. I mean, that shows how widespread this is among. In Sweden too, that there is kind of this romanticizing in certain parts of this kind of culture. But I mean, I could talk a bit about the political responses. I mean, as Patrik said, I mean, there is no quick fix for this situation. And I think the political parties are largely following their kind of ideological course when trying to, but still maybe changing. I mean, from the left-wing party and the Social Democratic Party, they point to that the problems we have are related to kind of socioeconomic inequality, unemployment. As I said, the educational system has been failing. We have a lot of young people who leave school without having passed. They have not passed the examinations, and so they can't continue with their studies. And then they say we have to start working with integration, and we have to put them into labor. We have to provide them with work and so on. And that is the path to go. And obviously that will take a long time, because some of those who have been coming to Sweden need a lot of education in order to be able to be employed, particularly the women. So that's. But we see, as you said, Miriam, Anders Ygeman, even in the Social Democratic Party, they have started talking about that we have to take tougher measures. And since the Social Democratic Party has been one belonging to most of the vocal critics of the Sweden Democrats, being that kind of xenophobic, very nationalist party with extremist roots, which they actually have in both in neo-Nazi and fascist organizations, and also international connections back in the 90s and even later on. But still, the Sweden Social Democrats now have started to look at their Danish colleagues, the Social Democratic Party in Denmark, that fully adapted, I can say, to the Danish People's Party's rhetoric. So they talk about kind of ghetto areas, and they want to dissolve the ghettos. And they also employ specific ghetto politics. So if you commit a crime in a ghetto area, the punishment is kind of harder than if you commit a crime in other areas. I don't know to what extent that have been kind of implemented yet, but and I think you should see the statement by Ygeman firstly as a strategic way, kind of probing out what can we say. Since, I mean, the Social Democratic Party has changed their position on NATO, they have also changed their position on immigration and criminality into a more restrictive rhetorics. So I think you could see the statement by Ygeman as a way of probing out, maybe we can talk about in terms of ethnicity as well. That would haven't been possible, I would say, 1 year ago. I mean, this is kind of a very recent change. And it's hard for me to say to what extent that is kind of anchored within the broader party. I think there are members who are disappointed with him, but there are other members in the Social Democratic
Excuse me, Anne-Cathrine, is ethnicity a metaphor for Islam?
Well, I mean, it's previous. I mean, the Islam has been just to continue, to continue. Yeah, I was, because then from the right-wing parties, the conservative parties, and the Sweden Democratic Party, they see the solution to the problems. I mean, there you have more restrictive immigration, immigration should be restricted. Sweden is kind of full. I mean, before the war in Ukraine started and the EU Mass Directive came, the Jimmy Åkesson, the party leader of the Sweden Democrats, said, well, Sweden is full. There are no more immigrants to Sweden. And other parties were kind of saying, well, we have to have very restrictive immigration policies. And even Magdalena Andersson said shortly, days after the February 24th, that, well, now it's up to the other European countries to take the responsibility, because Sweden did that in 2015. So the parties to the right, I mean, they are going on more powers to the police, more police cooperation. The police have to, and the judicial systems need to have more means at their disposal. And then they are also saying, well, in other European countries, actually, I mean, some see the increasing gang violence as a consequence of that. With Sweden got access to the police, you know this better than me, Patrik, the EncroChat files, and there they find that there were a lot of Swedish kind of criminals that were involved in transporting drugs in Europe and bringing it into Sweden. And so they have been arresting many leaders of different Swedish gangs. And now it is said, I don't know if it's true, that there is kind of internal kind of conflicts that are now playing out, and that's one reason why we see increasing gang violence in Sweden. And obviously the Swedish police and judiciary system would like to have means like that, which they don't have at these moments. And obviously there is the discussions, are these means efficient or not in combating and kind of gang violence and getting the crimes. So for your question, ethnicity, I mean, until 2018, it was kind of the Sweden Democrats that were talking about that different cultures don't go very well along together. There are conflicts and they have to adapt. I mean, that was part of their nationalist rhetorics. We have seen also that other parties increasingly have started talking in the same way, but not using kind of a pure nationalist way of talking. But of course, the Sweden Democrats previously talked about particularly Islam as a foreign culture that is not kind of compatible with Western value, as do many other far and extreme right parties in Europe. And I think this was the first time that the social democratic minister used ethnicity as a way, and he was actually responding to a question posed by a journalist. So I don't know if he would have done that unless he would have received the question, but he talked, say, well, we should have not more than, was it 50% non-Nordic inhabitant in certain parts, and obviously he meant suburbs. So this is also kind of a new element in the Swedish debate, and I think many were kind of surprised that a social democratic minister started talking about ethnicity. Ethnicity has been part of the Swedish political debate, but from the usual suspect, the Sweden Democrats.
So, in other words, the Social Democrats are setting the agenda. The Swedish Democrats are setting at least the rhetoric and the agenda.
Yes.
Patrik, one more question, and please prepare or raise your hand or tell me through the chat that you want to raise a question, and we do it live. Patrik, I would like to know the policy towards Russia and the attitude, war in Ukraine and Russia. Are there any voices that say, well, probably the sanctions are hurting us more than they're hurting Russia? Are there any dissenting voices, or all political parties are in favor of sanctions and the let's say, European policy towards Russia and the war in Ukraine?
Yes, that is the short answer. There is a total support for Ukraine within the political debate in Sweden. There is no voices in the debate, in the election debate, saying that we are taking more beating than Russia with the sanctions, and we should we should abandon Ukraine and get the energy flowing again. If someone did that in the Swedish election right now, that person, and if it was a party leader, that would just be a big failure and get heavily beaten in the debate. There is no room in the Swedish debate to take that position and be standing after the criticism, to speak it very bluntly. Sweden stands very firm behind the sanctions scheme and Ukraine.
And if the economic consequences of the war bite, I understand Sweden founded an agency for psychological resilience. Do you think they will help people to resist the hardship?
Well, the agency is not working on the domestic debate. That is very important to point out. It's an agency working against foreign influence. So if Russia would launch a larger campaign, I mean, there is a small size campaign ongoing all the time in the low intensive area, but if they would increase, then the agency would step in and point out that the Russians are doing this. And they are also working on increasing the knowledge and the resilience in the information sphere of the society. Right now they have a campaign where they show magicians manipulating people's memory in order to show people that you can be manipulated. So there are on YouTube videos right now on their campaign. But I would like also to point out one thing that we haven't mentioned, and that is the connection between extremists and criminality. You see those connections both from the militant Islamic side, but also connection between far-right motorcycle gangs and so on. And also one thing that happened during the Swedish election, and that was you had a terror attack in Almedalen, Gotland, in beginning of July, where a woman was stabbed by a person with a background in the Nordic resistance movement, the Nazi movement, even if he acted on his own and he was deemed psychological unfit when he did that deed. But he had another target. The one he killed was a woman involved in psychiatric she was working with the Swedish psychiatric care. But he had also another target, and that was the Center Party leader Annie Lööf. So now in the process of court, it is said that she was his preferred target, and that is also something to reflect upon on the level of the debate and the intensity of the debate, which is also one thing that has been discussed during the election.
Well, you have mentioned right-wing Nazi extremism that a lot of us who are not from the Nordic countries have learned through Millennium and other novels, crime novels. But how about the Islamic State and gangs? Is there any connection there?
Yeah.
Foreign or the Kurds?
Well, you have in the extreme Islamic groups, you have connections different ways, both on tapping welfare system, for example, having schools and kindergartens, but also to gangs, and you also seen when that Dane Rasmus Paludan went around in Swedish communities and burning the Quran. You had some turmoils, and there you also see the connections between hardliner Islamic and also criminality. So there are connections there.
Thank you.
Can I just add
Please.
to that there is, I mean, a lot of research, there is research showing that extremists are more active during elections years because that provides them with visibility. And we should also remember that Sweden has a kind of a sad history of politicians being killed. We had
Anna Lindh.
Anna Lindh that was killed during the European Parliamentary campaign. No, the Euro referendum
2003.
campaign in 2003. So I mean that's very, and of course then Olof Palme that was killed in 1986. That's a long time ago, but that was also it's kind of a murder that's still not really solved. But we know that extremists are more acting during election years, not only in Sweden but in other countries.
You're referring to both internal, you mean far-right supremacist group, or foreign extremists, both?
Both, but mainly since I'm doing research on far right, we can see that far right groups and both kind of the parliamentary far right and the more extremist, I mean, like the Nordic resistance movement, that a purely national socialist movement, that they are more active during periods. And we should not forget that there is another far right party that's kind of a secession from the Sweden Democrats. It's their old youth association, to which the Sweden Democrats broke their ties with in 2015, and that's Alternative for Sweden. They are aiming for parliamentary power, and we have three elections at the same time: the national, the regional, and the local. And they hope to gain some representation, at least in some local communities. That remains to be seen. But they are quite extremist, and I suppose that they may have a different relation to Russia and Russian interests, and also to the far right in Ukraine as well. I know that they have been visiting one another. They have international contacts.
Thank you.
Patrik knows more about that.
Stefan from the Austrian press agency. I will introduce those that I know. Stefan, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mirjana. I would like to thank both experts for the very interesting presentations. I've got a question concerning the Euroscepticism in Sweden, because Sweden has been for many years one of the countries that is said to be more Eurosceptic than others. There has been also talk about the Swexit after the Brexit. And I would like to know from both of you if there has been some kind of change in this attitude, in this public attitude after the Ukraine crisis. We have seen that Sweden has aligned with NATO, but has it also become more friendly towards the European Union, or is this unchanged? We have also seen in Denmark that there has been a shift. There has been a referendum about a closer allegiance with the European Union. I would like to know how the situation is in Sweden right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. Who will start? Patrik, foreign policy?
Well, there is a broad support for the EU membership in the Swedish public, and that has been broad support for a very long time, and that is very stable. But what you're referring to is perhaps also that we have decided not to join the euro, and that was the referendum in 2003. And there, as stable as the support is for the EU membership, the same way the stability of not wanting to join the euro persists in the Swedish debate. I would say that the Swexit debate is that died among those who tried to push it after the catastrophic failures of the Brexiteers, and when they saw the havoc of the Brits. With that said, you cannot exclude the possibility that it will come back, because the Sweden Democrats do not want to be a part of the EU. One can think that in the long term they might influence the moderate party and the Christian Democrats, who has been truly pro-European parties, especially the moderates, in this. But this is still 5 years from now that I guess that if this happened, then it's when you can see it.
Thank you. Anne-Cathrine?
I could add to that. Yes, I mean the debate on the European Union and the attitudes towards the EU have become more positive during the last years, and I think it also applies to the euro, but it's not a political issue. I mean, if you have a referendum on not joining the euro, it's very difficult to change that decision. And since the Swedish economy has been doing quite well outside the euro, I mean, there is no reason for, and you can see also that countries inside the euro haven't been doing that well. There is no kind of political interest in kind of pushing for that question. But what could be added is that there have been 3 parties that have had that the issue that Sweden should leave the European Union, like a Swexit, in their programs. That has been the left-wing party, the Green Party, and the Sweden Democrats. The Green Party removed that paragraph from the party program when they became a member of a Swedish government. That was kind of a part of becoming a legitimate governmental party. That was in 2000. Oh, now I don't remember. Is it when did the Green Party join the government? Was it 2012?
Now 14, after
14,
the election 14.
Yes, yeah, 2014. And we can also see that the Sweden Democrats, they have softened up on the European Union. They are negative to what this kind of supranational entity like the European Union, but they see no concern for joining it right now or leaving it right now. And I mean, with the war in Ukraine, they accepted the EU Mass Directive in an area which they have been very critical. That is, EU having common asylum and forming common asylum and immigration policies. So these 2 parties have actually changed a lot. But of course, it's like Patrik said, they have kind of a freedom of maneuver, so they can change their position back, particularly the Sweden Democrats, depending on what's happening. But since the far right is becoming stronger in Europe in general, we can see that they also cooperate a lot in the European Parliament and in the European Union institutions. So they see that kind of an important platform for their activities as well. And now when Sweden is taking over the chairmanship of the European Union from January, I mean, they have said one of the priorities will be Ukrainian membership, to push on for Ukrainian membership in the EU. And Sweden Democrats have been a party that the EU shouldn't become larger. I mean, then they have talked about Turkey. It remains to be seen if Ukraine would be kind of a acceptable partner in the future European Union.
Thank you. Any other questions? Because I have more. Well, then I'll ask a question.
Yes, can I ask a quick question?
Yes, of course. Please
Hi.
introduce yourself.
I'm Verena Sophie Meyer, ORF Radio. You mentioned that the Sweden Democrats, there's concern about their rights. Sorry, I'm currently on the way to the airport for actually going to Sweden. They have
Welcome.
ties. Thank you. So there's been concern about Russian ties to Russia, as I understand what the Social Democrats say. So, but actually they changed their stance on NATO. Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, if you look back in time, Sweden Democrats have been involved with other far-right European parties that have been very pro-Russian. For example, Nigel Farage. They gave a prize award to Václav Klaus in 2016 in Stockholm, etc., etc. And their voting pattern when they entered the European Parliament in 2014 was to follow UKIP, and also that we see on the that, for example, when their former defense spokesperson Mikael Jansson left the party in 2018. He immediately joined the Alternative for Sweden and went to a Duma conference in Moscow arranged for pro-Russian parties, and he praised Putin for his involvement in Syria at that meeting. And what is most problematic today, I would say that the Sweden Democrats cooperate or perhaps also partly control the alternative media landscape that is very pro-Russian. So that is what they're doing on one hand. On the other hand, they realized in 2014, 2015 that it was not very good in the Swedish debate to become pro-Russian, because the sentiment in Sweden traditionally is not pro-Russian, and their own heritage is from the Nazi movement, and their so-called forefathers in the party demonstrated around the statue of Charles XII in Stockholm, the hero king that got defeated in Poltava 1709, standing there in a statue pointing eastwards. And here they realized that it was better for them to build political influence in order to ditch Russia, and then they started to work with their connections to the Republican Party, the Trump Republican Party, and there with the Trump Republicans, they kind of outmaneuvered the moderates, because traditionally the moderates and the Republicans have been sister parties, but the moderates they didn't like Trump, and they are the old Republican, so to speak. So here they moved their efforts in the foreign policy, because they also realized that in order to get influence over a Swedish government, Russia would never work out with the Conservative Party. So that is basically what has happened the last 7 years.
Thank you. Sure, please go ahead.
I could just add to that. I'm agree with a lot of with what Patrik is saying, and I mean this is kind of it's a very sensitive issue in Scandinavia, and given the also in Finland is the same for the far right party, and given the Finland has had a war with Russia, I mean it would be kind of very hard to have relationship with Russia, and you see the same pattern among the Nordic and Scandinavian far right parties. If you compare with the FPÖ in Austria, that have kind of a bilateral agreement with United Russia, and also Salvini in Lega, that were a personal friend with Putin and traveling a lot to Russia as well. So the Sweden Democrats have also on the European level and in the European Parliament been reluctant to cooperate and sit in the same party group as these more pro-Russian radical right parties in Europe. So they and that's also part of the explanation why they have forged contact with kind of conservative and kind of far right tendencies in the Republican Party in the US presently, because they have been part of the ECR, Europe of Conservative and Reformists in the European Parliament, and so they have also closer connections with kind of conservative British politicians, but also in other European countries, and as well with the Republican Party.
Okay, the next question is Jürgen Streichhammer from the Austrian paper Die Presse. Jürgen, go ahead.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for your valuable insights so far. I wondered if Danish social democrats have become kind of a role model for their Swedish colleagues nowadays, because as far as I understand, the Danish social democrats have been tougher on immigration. They have put in some tough measures also to tackle gang violence, and the Swedish social democrats have been reluctant to go the same path. But now this is changing. So do you see that the Danish social democrats are becoming kind of a role model? And if yes, which concrete steps are the Swedish social democrats considering that are already in place in Denmark, or have been put into place in Denmark. This question goes to both of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jürgen. Go ahead. Anne-Cathrine, go ahead.
Should I can start. I mean, I think the Social Democratic Party wouldn't admit it publicly that they are looking to Denmark, because it's the Sweden Democrats that always have been upholding Denmark as the model country that Sweden should follow when it comes to immigration and law and order. When Jimmie Åkesson was asked, Jimmie Åkesson, the party leader of the Sweden Democrats, was asked which is his favorite place in Sweden, he said a small town in Denmark, a suburb outside Copenhagen. So it was Denmark that was kind of his favorite place in Sweden, meaning that Sweden should become like Denmark. But within the Social Democratic Party, there have been a few voices saying, well, the Sweden Social Democrats should look at the Danish Social Democrats part, because they have been doing quite well in the elections. And that's the reason why they are in government right now. And why they have been successful is that they have been adapting to the Danish People's Party's rhetorics on law and order, immigration, segregation, to such an extent that they have been outbidding the Danish People's Party. And now the Danish People's Party, because of that, but also because of internal problems within the party, as well as there is a new competitor, the Nye Borgerlige in Denmark, that are that are competing for the same voters at the Danish People's Party. So there are many aspects to looking at Denmark, both for finding policy solutions, believing that you kind of can get away with the radical right party, but it doesn't seem to be the case, because there are always voters prepared to vote for such a party, and also then to get into government. I think it is it maybe does in the longer term it might not be kind of a good strategy, because what we see in the Danish case, that they haven't been able to increase their vote. They are actually now losing votes after the pandemics. During the pandemic, all parties in government kind of increased their share of the votes, and so did even the Danish Social Democratic parties. But now Mette Frederiksen, the party leader and Danish Prime Minister, is not doing that well. So policy-wise, yes, I think the Social Democrats are increasingly looking at Denmark, but they are reluctant to say so. And also from a strategic point of view, trying to win back the workers who have transferred their votes to the radical right party. In the short time, it might be successful. In the longer term, it's not sure, because what has happened in Denmark is that the middle class Social Democratic voters with more liberal values, they have moved on to other parties and left the Social Democratic parties. Not all, but some of them.
Thank you, Patrik.
Well, I would just shortly phrase it as that we have seen test balloons, but not a paradigm shift.
I see. Isadora Wallnöve, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Isadora Wallnöve from the Standard. It's a newspaper in Austria. I have 3 questions. First, the rising living costs in Sweden are a big topic, as you said, and Magdalena Andersson released a big package to combat the effects of the rising costs. So first, do you think that benefited her? And second, are there parties that are fiscally more conservative when it comes to spending and social kind of welfare spending?
Thank you. Which one would like to reply, I guess? Or you want, yeah, please.
I can start this time, and I think when you look at what the parties own, what kind of questions they own, one thing that the Social Democratic owns in the public's view is the ownership of crisis management. So in that perspective, I would say that this package will benefit the Social Democrats, because they show that they are ready, able and willing to respond to the energy crisis by this package in order to avoid collapse of the energy market and the energy market firms. So that is what I would argue. On the fiscal term, we have had what one could say the experience of the 90s, which have made the Swedish financial economical terms that all parties have said that they are following fiscal rules, but this have been undermined the last couple of years. But there has been a consensus in the Swedish public debate among the parties that you should follow these fiscal rules in order to create a budget surplus in order to have for a crisis like what we are seeing now. And perhaps Jungar can give that in more detail.
I agree a lot with Patrik, and as you saw when presenting which are the kind of the most topical issues during the election campaign, economy has been climbing, but it's not belonging to the top priorities. So I think it's hard for kind of the older parties that have been responsible for crisis management and dealing with economic crisis to kind of mobilize voters on those issues. It remains to be seen. There are a couple of days remains, but it's hard to see. Well, I would also say that in terms of the economic situation, I think when it comes to government formation, I think there will be more problems if we would have a center-right government, because there are even though they are closer to one another economically wise than, for instance, the Social Democratic Party and the Conservative Party, there will indeed be tensions, because I think both the Conservative Party and the Liberal Party would push for maybe lower taxes and not to reduce kind of these private initiatives like the center-left government would like to do. But I think the Sweden Democrats, obviously, if they, I think it's hard to see them in government after these elections, but they would probably be a support party, and in exchange for their votes in parliament, they would have to have concessions. And obviously, mostly in their kind of core issues like immigration and law and order and integration. But obviously, they have now, during the electoral campaign, said, well, we won't accept any kind of reductions in when it comes to unemployment benefits. They would also like to include dental care into the public health care. It's just partially done so. So they are more left wing leaning on the welfare issues, but it's hard to see that they would press for these issues so hard if they would get concessions on the major issues. So there is a greater internal conflict on economic issues in a potential center right government than in the center left. Well, in the center left, we have the center party that would be kind of a difficult party to please on economic policies for the social democratic parties, and in particular if the Green and the left-wing party would be support parties, but that remains to be seen what will be the case.
Thank you, Catherine. Gail?
My third question, sorry.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Yeah,
Go.
you said that bloc policy or bloc politics are dissolving, but we see that SD has kind of joined the right bloc, and the center has joined the left bloc. So why do you think that those bloc politics are dissolving?
Well, I mean, they have dissolved in terms of that we have a center-right bloc, and the center party was part of the alliance, the center-right bloc, and now they have transferred, as you say, to the Social Democratic Party. So obviously they are playing out that there are two governmental alternatives that the voters can choose on this. So you know now that if you vote on the center party, you won't support the formation of a center-right government. So still that is in play, but you don't know what position they will have in government in that sense, and what they will kind of, it's part of the negotiations after the elections, what types of concessions the center party would like to have in order to support the social democratic government. And obviously, if they support or not is related to their support in the elections. I mean, I think for party leaders, it's important to give these cues to the voters, which government will I support, and then they will see, well, how does that affect the opinion in the opinion polls? But the real, the result will be seen in the elections. And if the center party would do a bad elections, given that they would support a center-left government, it's not sure that they will be a support party. So there is a lot of strategizing after the elections to be expected as well, against the background of their increase of the vote.
Georg?
Thank you.
Unmute yourself, Georg. Georg, unmute yourself. You're mute. We don't hear you.
Sorry, I forgot about. Georg Rauchenberg from EDM Info. I have an economic question concerning electricity price, energy prices. Sweden has a very large share of renewable energy. However, according to the European merit order, always the most expensive way of production is dictating the price. Now it is gas. So how is Sweden handling this situation? Also concerning the elections coming up, is that an issue? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to respond?
I can start. I'm not an expert on the electricity policies, the present day and the pricing system. I know that there is a debate going on, and in particular, since the pricing system differs a lot throughout the large country. I think you said that Sweden is the third largest country in relation to its territory of the European Union. But of course, in the political debate, there is a discussion about which kind of energy Sweden should kind of use and produce and invest in. And now there is a debate on nuclear power, if there should, because Sweden also has decided on closing nuclear power plants and not to build new. And that debate has started again from the center-right parties, that they would like to invest in more nuclear power. And then wind power obviously is a very sensitive issue for many of parties. We have a long coastal line with a lot of wind, and there are many enterprises, some of them China-sponsored, that would like to build kind of wind power plants. But there is, I mean, there is a lot of not in my backyard policies, in particular in municipalities, where these companies would like to build their windmills. So I think there is an ongoing debate, but the political parties are torn between their kind of climate kind of goals and reducing CAOs, and also with kind of the public opinion on what kind of energy they would like to have and prefer. And of course the investments. I mean, building nuclear power plants, given against the background of the Finnish and French experience, it's not that cheap. It's expensive and it can take a long time, and it depends on who builds them and so on, to what kind you have international interests involved in that.
Patrik, would you like to add?
Well, what I could add is that in the Swedish energy market, it's divided into 4 different markets with different pricing. And what you have is that you have lacking the capacity to send electricity over these markets. And that in combination with connecting with the European market has made a huge difference between up north and south of Sweden, where south of Sweden have basically European continental electricity prices, and the top of Sweden have had really low prices, because there you have the water plants, windmills, and so on. And this is really the big debate in especially anything south of Sundsvall. Is a big debate about the electricity bills. And you have seen different proposals. The left party, for example, have had the most populist approach, saying that Sweden should not export electricity and cut off from the European market in order to safeguard lower prices. So there you see some kind of isolationistic approaches, but that is a very margin party in the debate. But somehow remodeling the whole energy market is something that is a debate in the whole of Europe right now. And I assume that we will see huge changes in the European energy market the month to come in order to react to the Russian energy warfare against us.
Thank you. Any other questions, or we have a few minutes left? I have two questions, unless someone is. One is for Patrik. You mentioned, Patrik, earlier, and you're a journalist, that the alternative media is dominated by Swedish Democrats and pro-Russian stance, let's put it this way. Is Sweden successful in fighting fake news, misinformation, etc.? And if so, how come? What is the, what is the secret of the success?
Well, I wouldn't say that Sweden is successful in this, but we have some general advantages. We have a large media literacy, we have a high trust society, and we have well-established media with high trust. So these are factors that are good. But if you look at it, somewhere between, if I remember the figures correctly now from a Reuters Institute report, I think it's around 1/5 of the audience is frequently using alternative media, and you can see basically also that 1/5 of the population votes for the Sweden Democrats, and this creates, of course, two different versions of reality. One reality that Anne-Cathrine and I am living in, and the other reality where climate change is basically a hoax or largely overstated, where Russia is treated unfair, where restrictions against COVID is abuse from government or perhaps instigated by big pharma, etc., etc., etc. And this division is problematic, I would argue.
Thank you. And for Catherine, I have another question. I introduced you as an expert in far right, but after listening to you, you will soon be, or you already are, an expert in center politics, because what you initially researched is now becoming mainstream, or let's say an expert in mainstream politics.
Sure. I mean, that's what has been going on all over Europe, that center-right parties have adapted to the radical right parties. And of course, in Europe, when center-right parties get tired of being in opposition and they don't want to form cross-block coalitions with social democratic parties that might require kind of heavy compromises, they include radical right parties in government. I mean, that's been the case in Austria, in Italy, in Denmark as a support party, and that is, and in the Scandinavian countries, I mean, Norway and Finland as well. And Sweden has been a latecomer in that respect. Many reasons for that. So what we see is that the conservative parties have adopted both in terms of policy proposals, their rhetorics, but also the framing. I mean, when politicians talk about which are the main problems in our societies and how should they be solved, they also have kind of borrowed the framing of the radical right parties. And whether that is kind of successful strategy or not, that remains to be seen. I mean, if the hope is that they can, weaken the radical right parties, that doesn't seem to be the case. Still, the radical right parties are alive and kicking, apart from Denmark. and doing quite well. There are elections in Italy upcoming, and we have a really extreme radical right. I mean, Fratelli d'Italia that is competing with Lega over the voters. So I mean, it's becoming the new normal. What was kind of the radical, the abnormal is now the new normal in the European debate and in the political landscapes.
Thank you, Stefan. This is the last question, Stefan.
Yes, thank you. We've been talking now 90 minutes about Sweden, but we didn't mention the most prominent Swede, who is Greta Thunberg. And I would like to remind that she actually started her school strike for climate before the last elections, the Swedish elections. And although it was a bit quiet around her in the last months, I heard that she started new actions now before the elections. How come that the climate change issue is on such low profile in Sweden right now, despite of Greta Thunberg?
Thank you.
Oh, well,
It's
it's
nice
an excellent question. Sorry, Anne-Cathrine.
No, Patrik, you start.
Oh, I think it's an excellent question. There is one saying that I'm trying to translate now, but stating that you will not be prophet in your own home village is a Swedish saying, and I guess that is one fact. And the other, I would say that still this issue has been a lot in media for several years, and I'm now only guessing, but I think it might be some kind of fatigue and perhaps despair, and it's still not concrete. It should be a much larger issue, especially when we see now Europe the worst drought for 500 years, and the consequences that brings. And the consequences will be much more grave the years to come when you combine the climate change, security challenges, and so on and so on. But that's another discussion.
Yeah, I could add to that indeed, I mean, after the pandemic, I mean, Greta Thunberg has not been a high-profile person in the Swedish public debate or in the society, and not during this electoral campaign. And the issue of the climate has not been a high profile question. And I mean, it's surprising. And what we see in general, because there were young people who were supporting Greta, and what we have seen a change, that young people in Sweden today, they have become more conservative. The Conservative Party is the largest party among the Swedish young people of today, which is quite surprising. As a political scientist, I wouldn't use the term polarization, but we see that there is a division. We have young people who are concerned about the environment, and others who are concerned about more conservative issues like immigration. And the Environmental Party have had a very active youth association, the Green Party, but they are losing members and they are not that active. So we see kind of an attitudinal change among young people. And on a personal note, I think as a political scientist and believing in politics, I think it's kind of sad that I know that it's a successful strategy to be kind of forming an opinion outside of politics, but they have also been kind of anti-political in their message. And I think, I mean, in that we're not dealing with politics. And if you want to change, you have to engage in politics. And so I think it's sad they haven't done it, because it would be a very important voice in the political debate. And the Environmental Party has not been successful in mobilizing those young people who were doing the sitting strikes with Greta and were engaged in that kind of movement.
And also being part of the government for a long time. They left the government in last year, but they have taken a lot of beating and uncomfortable decisions also in regarding to their core interest, and I think that also plays in.
Yes.
I thank Anne-Cathrine, I thank Patrik. You have raised so many issues, and I'm sure we shall continue discussing these topics, many of the topics you have mentioned, for a long time to come. Before I give the last word to Sabine, I would just like to announce that on the 15th of September, from 9 to 10:30, and I can invite our speakers, we shall have an event on the elections in Italy with Lorenzo Pregliasco, who is an expert in public opinion. We would like to ask him why the Italian voters like Fratelli d'Italia so much, and with Giovanna Pancheri, who is a journalist and will address whether Europe should be scared of far-right government in Italy. Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Patrik. I hope we have made the Swedish elections and society a bit closer to this part of Europe that shares some of the very similar problems. Thank you so much, and Sabine?
Yeah, many thanks. There's, I think, nothing to add. Thanks a lot, Tak, for this very, very interesting insights. It will help, definitely help us to understand better what will be going on Sunday. And I wish you all a good day and hope to see you soon again. All the best.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.